Broken appliances in my kitchen when I moved in from the last tenant, but they won't fix, and they're still trying to raise my rent. Good evening, YouTube. This is a really quick rundown of what my video is going to be about. I'm going to try and do it as fast as possible, but let's start with the backbone of the city, transit. Now, TTC, Toronto Transit Commission, is the main transit system in the city. Every single day, anywhere between 2 million and 3 million people take the TTC. The other major transit system in the city is Metrolinx, who now owns GO Transit. Metrolinx was founded in 2006. It is very new. TTC is actually over 100 years old, and GO Transit is at least 50 years old. The reason why I said that it is the backbone of the city transit, because it is. It gets people places. If you don't have a car, how else are you going to get to work? Now, if you take transit, unfortunately, you know firsthand how flawed both systems are. The tragic part is, even though we as riders feel this way, so do the workers. So what's really going on? Although Metrolinx was founded in 2006 and has a significant less amount of riders than the TTC does, it receives much more funding and support from the government who created it. And I know that sounds like it makes sense. Of course the government's going to support their own thing that they made. I'm showing you now where the problem lies. The Eglinton LRT meaning light rail train, meaning streetcar, not subway streetcar. It is a Metrolinx project. Even though it's a Metrolinx project, TTC still pays. So when we finally get funding for the TTC, the money is actually going towards the Eglinton LRT and the Finch LRT, which are both Metrolinx projects that they don't properly plan in the first place. And it's on record. I'm not making this up or pulling it from anywhere. If you do your Googles, you will find the same things that I found. Earlier I mentioned that Presto is a Metrolinx thing that they put into the TTC as a means for it to be easier for us to pay and blah 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 blah. Anyone who has been on transit for the past 10 years at least, even the past year, you may have used Presto and the machine may have not worked. Especially between 2015 and 2020, the machines barely worked, meaning a lot of fare was technically not being paid, and we were being blamed for it as riders, even though it's Presto and Metrolinx's fault. It's so bad that it's actually hundreds of millions of dollars that was lost in fare over those years, and Metrolinx had to pay $38 million to TTC because of this. They originally only wanted like $8 million from Metrolinx for this, and Metrolinx was like, we don't owe you money, and they had to go to court and pay even more money. The work that's being done on these Metrolinx projects actually disrupts TTC service and other projects, such as fixing streetcar tracks and regular service. In 2019, the city's Auditor General released a report that said that Presto failing actually made even more revenue loss for TTC than TTC even knew of. The actual conclusion that they made is it's impossible to know how much fare they were losing in total because of the amount of gaps that was left in management. Now, when it comes to any business, any corporation, even when it comes to drug empires, management is everything. Management is everything. What is the purpose of government? Managing and allocating funds and resources. The government of Ontario actually spent over $1 billion implementing the system across the province, while TTC estimates that Presto actually cost them $246 million to implement. One of the most unknown and tragic facts is Presto takes 5% of the fare that we pay, and they keep it. So you think you're paying TTC your full fare? Metrolinx gets 5% of it. Even if you're on a TTC bus, a TTC streetcar, Metrolinx is taking that if you pay Presto. In 2018, the CEO of Metrolinx said that it would be easy for us to take over the TTC subway. That is a very strange statement to say when you're draining them of funds, right? Now, many people don't even know who Phil Verster is. That's the CEO of Metrolinx, who is paid almost $1 million every year to be the CEO of Metrolinx. Now, even if you remove Metrolinx from the equation, funding cuts from City Council has left the city with a $125 million revenue shortfall on public transit. That is a lot of money. Now let's bring it back to Metrolinx. Metrolinx lost $500 million in sunken additional unrecoverable costs between 2009 and 2018 due to numerous changes in transit plans. How do you lose $500 million in changes in transit plans? Who is planning this? Where is the money going? Now let's talk about City Council and the TTC chairs. The most recent chair of TTC is John Burnside, who is also a city councillor. He is chosen by John Tory personally. Another person who is chosen by John Tory is his good friend Rick Leary to be the CEO of the TTC. The previous CEO, Andy Byford from Australia, I believe, was very terrible. Ask any employee who has ever worked there. Just ask them. In 2021, there was a near collision in the subway that was covered up by the CEO, Rick Leary. Why was it covered up? Because when he was in Boston running that transit system, there was a collision that resulted in people dying. I forgot to say earlier that if you evade fare, you're paying up to $400, while if you park illegally, you're facing a $30 fine. Someone who heavily supports this is a city councilor named Steve Holiday, who knows? While riders are facing the fear of being set on fire on the bus, Steve Holiday insists that fare evasion is the real threat, and that that's what really makes us feel unsafe, even though we keep telling him that is not at all the issue. Not only is this a city councilor who's saying this stuff, it's someone who sits on the TTC board that is chosen. So far that we have learned how mismanaged funds are when it comes to transit, but we are also learning the faces and names of the people who mismanage this stuff. If 2/3 of transit is funded by ridership fare, 66%, clearly we need more help, right? If 12,000 plus employees are saying they don't feel safe at their job because of who the CEO is, and their union is fighting to get the CEO removed for years at this point, and even though the CEO tried to cover up a near subway collision in 2021, which is another reason why TTC workers do not feel safe having him as the CEO, he remains as the CEO. Nobody knows why. And I would love to go on and on and on and in depth, but I'm going to leave you with these two charts because I'm trying to do this as quick as possible. The chart with the red arrow pointing to it is the operating subsidies from 2000 to 2015. It shows where all the funding comes from. Below, with the blue arrow pointing to it, is the 10-year capital plan, where it shows that funding needs will rise. Needs will rise, not the funding. The need for funding will rise. While city funding, which is the big, thick green one, goes down over the next 10 years. So they're planning to completely stop funding our transit. And you might be wondering, why would they do this to people? What is the end goal? We may or may not have had a mayor that purposely tried to sabotage the transit system over his 8-year reign over the city. Why? Because his political party that he illegally joined at 14 runs the government of Ontario right now. Oops, did I say that out loud? I'll come back to that later. For now, if you want to, please go back and pause and read all of the slides that I added, because it is a lot if you feel like it. There's another thing that the mayor may or may not have sabotaged in his 8-year, technically 9 at this point, reign.
The next station is
Housing.
Kennedy Station.
While housing is not an issue exclusive to Toronto, these numbers are alarming. Something that they don't like to tell us much is the fact that when they tell us they're building affordable housing, only 25% of it is legally, has to be affordable. So if there's a place that has 16,000 rentals being built, only 5,500 of them have to be affordable. And then by the time the first year is up and rent rises, it's no longer affordable. So when John Tory quit his job because someone made a diss track, because he cheated on his wife with an employee, and we had to have a new election by surprise, he was supporting the person who he appointed as the chair of affordable housing. That's who he was supporting in their run for mayor to replace him. A very scary fact is she supports affordable rentals being built in laneways, garden suites, and coach houses. So if you want an apartment that's affordable, you have to live in an alleyway or in somebody's garden. That is the most terrifying thing that I can comprehend from the chair of affordable housing. That is terrifying, and that's why I don't know if I'm pronouncing her name right or not, and I'm not gonna fact check, because that is so disrespectful to me that I can't give respect back. Oops, my bad, so sorry. This is the same person who was responsible for Toronto community housing as far back as 2014. 2011, Toronto community housing faced a repair backlog of $650 million. Instead of fixing these conditions, such as black mold in people's living areas, they supported instead, let's just sell the housing. Let's just sell it. Like, why would people need housing? Who needs to live in places? That's dumb. That's what they thought. Their idea of selling community housing off was so scary that 3 former mayors wrote letters expressing concern about this. 2 years later, in 2013, TCHC's repair backlog increased to $751 million. Are you kidding me? Back to Andrea, she is on the board of directors for TCHC. For those who don't know, in case I forgot to say, that is public housing. The Toronto community housing issue is a very deep subject to go into, and that could be a whole nother video. How are you gonna run for mayor when your only plan to build affordable housing is the Housing Now program that only makes 25% of housing being built affordable? Where does that make sense? What lifetime does that make sense in? Actually, if you would try and tell them, hey, if 5,000 out of 16,000 is a crazy number, you should be building more affordable housing, they'll tell you, oh no, it's 34%, we're giving you more than you deserve. It's a little crazy. It's a little rude. I just can't imagine running for mayor when I actively contribute to the fact that 168 people are turned away from shelters a day because there's 20,000 people that are homeless in the city. I don't know. Don't listen to me though, I'm broke. My opinion doesn't matter. I'm not a person. Tragically, people spent years at this point begging the mayor to please declare homelessness crisis in Toronto, and he refused. He waited until he was ready to quit his job to do that. In 2014, when John Tory became mayor and he made Andrea in charge of affordable housing, shelters were already full. Shelters did not have room in 2014. Ironically, almost 10 years later, nothing changes. Let's make it even scarier. In just 5 years, the GTA lost 27% of its private rentals that were affordable to people who are earning less than $60,000 a year. Apartments under $1,000 dominated the rental market in 2006. Meanwhile, apartments renting more than $1,500 per month have skyrocketed. The number of higher cost rentals grew from $50,000 in 2006 to $500,000 in 2021. They now represent more than half of the rental market is unaffordable. Over half of the rental market is unaffordable. I can keep repeating it, but I'm sure it clicked already. We have lost more than 130,000 rental units that were affordable. And we know that they are not building enough to replace it. It's on paper. There's proof. I provided proof here, and you can find even worse facts on Google. If my voice raises at any point during the video and my tone becomes very aggressive, it's because this makes me very angry. So now that we've determined that over 130,000 rental units that were affordable have been destroyed and completely removed from the city and not enough are being built, let's move on to mayors and their vices. Because who is responsible for transit and housing? The mayor! One of the most beloved mayors in Toronto history is Mel Lastman. He was the first mayor when all of the boroughs of Toronto were joined. But we're not even going to talk about him in this video. I just wanted to mention him because he was really important. In 2003, when Mel Lastman left, he was replaced with David Miller. David Miller was mayor until 2010, and then it became Rob Ford. Rob Ford might be our most viral mayor ever because of his crack scandal. Now, when you are coming after the mayor who had a crack scandal, obviously you are going to look like the most squeaky, most clean man alive. But that's not the only thing that makes you look squeaky and clean. I would also look squeaky and clean if I had the same family ties as this man. And even though he does think that the reason why we hate on him is because of his family ties, it's because of how he uses them. He became the CEO of Rogers because Ted Rogers called him and was like, hey, you got no experience, but I like your confidence, let's do this. Who else has that amount of privilege in their entire lifetime? And having privilege is not the problem. Being somebody who hates broke and homeless people, both separately and simultaneously, is the problem. That is insane. This is where it gets scary again. Back to Metrolinx. When Metrolinx first began, the chair from 2010 to 2018 was Robert Pritchard. Robert is a lawyer who worked for the law firm Tories. Whose family runs that? I don't know. He's also the chair of the Bank of Montreal. And that's not even all of his jobs. So if we take a little peek into the history of John Tory's life, not including his family connections, you will see that his grandfather was instrumental in establishing the University of Toronto Law School in 1949, where his family became star students. Guess who else went there? Robert Pritchard? Oh my god. So, Robert Pritchard became the dean of the U of T Law School, and when John Tory was denied or failed or whatever he said happened, his father wanted to pull strings to make sure that he got in. But John just had his heart set on politics because of the way he was illegally recruited into his political party in grade 9. But we'll talk about that later. It's so crazy that the dean that was friends with his grandfather and the dean that was dean when he tried to go to law school is the same guy that was the chair of Metrolinx while he was mayor. Isn't that crazy? What a coincidence. When John Tory was becoming mayor, he insisted that his influences on how he wants to lead like the city is the late Ted Rogers and other businessmen like the Toronto Dominion Bank CEO, the vice president of another bank, the Imperial Bank of Commerce, and so on and so on. If you're a mayor of a city, why would you need to model yourself after people who run banks? That's a little crazy. That's a wild statement. Something very interesting that I learned in my Googles was his wife is a home developer. She's president of a residential home developer that might be affected by city planning decisions. His new office, he said, had developed a framework to deal with all of these connections to ensure that he complied and even exceeded conflict of interest requirements. I intend to lead by example, he said. During his 8+ years as mayor, he continued to collect $100,000 a year from his role as the CEO of Rogers Media. He's also a shareholder in the company as a whole. So now that we've established the hundreds of years of history in the country that he has in terms of law and business and money, let's talk about the fact that he was voting down a motion to declare homelessness in Toronto a public health crisis. He voted against 24-hour warming centers in the winter time when people were freezing to death on the streets. Instead, he insisted that we should just do a study and see if warm places are necessary for people to not freeze to death at night. There's no words. There is no words. Another responsibility that he had is he sat on the police services board ever since his election in 2014, so that's almost 9 years he was sitting on this board. So anything that happened that he pretended was out of his control, he had opinions on. He was allowed to speak out and to whoever is in charge. He was allowed to speak. So from his time on the board, he thought, you know what, John Burnside, the guy who's in charge of getting tents bulldozed, beating up homeless people and so on, let's make him the chair of the TTC because being a cop makes you qualified for that job. But then again, John Tory is the same mayor that made the CEO his friend that is responsible for people dying in the Boston Transit system. I'm not a big politics person. I don't care about parties. I just care about how resources and funds are allocated because that's the purpose of government. No matter what party is in charge, that's their job, right? But it does matter when it comes to the people in charge and why they do what they do. Let's talk about the PC party. I'm not sure how much I can say because they will come after me. But it's the same party that Doug Ford is currently in charge of. Oops. For those who don't know, Doug Ford is the brother of Rob Ford, in case you forgot who Rob Ford is. So anyways, I'm not directly accusing the mayor of purposely sabotaging not only housing, but the entire transit system, because his political party is in charge of Metrolinx, but it kind of makes sense. I'm not saying that at all. I never saw that. I just said that makes a lot of sense. Who knows? One thing I did say earlier is that he was illegally recruited into that political party at age 14. Here is a video of him explaining the story. I want anyone watching this to know, if you are in high school, any age in high school or younger, if somebody says, hey, if you want to come to my party on Saturday, you have to bring $1 and join my dad's political party, that is illegally recruiting children to a political party.
Somebody came along.
He said on video that this happened to him, but he smiled while saying it, so it probably continues to go over heads.
Public life, and it was interesting, and but we'll see.
Well, we'll watch with interest.
Another of those classic non-answers that I try not to give anymore.
You're training yourself not to give.
Yeah, no, but I mean, I'll give it on that just because you're unwise to give a definitive answer. Exactly.
Thank you. By the fact that you joined the Young Progressive Conservatives when you were 14 years old. Is that right?
I did.
14?
And it was one of those things, Catherine, as you know, that a lot of people end up joining political parties. I mean, how many could say they join a political party for ideological reasons or on some policy issue at age 14? In my case, I was standing by the locker at my high school, my locker,
right,
and a classmate came up to me and said, we're having a party on Friday night and you have to join the YPCs for $1 in order to come. Handed over the $1, and I've now been 40 plus years, as doing just about every job.
Comes out.
Yeah, but
the facts are, when you have multiple jobs given to you based off just who your family knows, you do not have to run for mayor of a city. You do not have to do this and ruin people's lives. The only thing that we can be left to assume is that somebody wanted to run for mayor because he wanted to help his party do what they wanted to do with the city. I made this entire video to say, this is how you kill a city. Any organization, no matter what it is, the easiest and fastest way to kill it is from the inside. When you take funds and mismanage them, mayhem ensues. When you take funds and mismanage them intentionally, people suffer. Housing falls apart, transit falls apart, and all of this was done intentionally. Why? Metrolinx wants to take over TTC. The only way to do that is to make sure they lose their funding, which is ridership declining, and the city refusing to properly manage funds. That is how you crash a transit system. How you crash a housing system is you change laws and you let laws be broken in favor of building condominiums that no one can afford to live in because you and all of your friends are either developers, invest in developments, or you're married to interior decorators, and so on and so on. This is not just a Toronto issue. This is a major city issue. It even happens to small towns. But I'm using this city as an example because I know exactly how it happened. And I just showed you exactly how it happened. And there's things that have happened in decades before that also contributed to this. But this is what happened today to put us where we're at today. Where people are facing $50 rent increases every single year. If your rent increases by $50 a month, think about what that does to people's lives. If a mayor refuses to declare an opioid and homeless crisis, think about what that does to people's lives. If 92% of the student body in a school is writing letters to the mayor saying we don't feel safe going to our school, please talk to the school board for us, and you refuse to do so, and then suddenly when you quit your job because you cheated on your wife, they get a new principal and things start to look better for them, think about what that does to children's lives. When you allow buildings and the people who own the buildings to paint the exterior gray as an excuse to raise rent, even though there's bugs broken appliances, broken everything in these buildings, but they're allowed to have $50 per month rent increases. Think about what that does to people's lives. When we have over 50,000 condo units open a year for people to move into, even though we're not building more schools or getting more buses, think about what that does to people's lives. This is how you derail a city. This is how you kill a city. Thank you for coming to my TED Talk.
The next station is Victoria Park.
Those questions.
Do you
Victoria
smoke
Park
crack
Station.
cocaine?
Exactly. Yes, I have smoked crack cocaine. But no, do I?
Nobody feels there's any premium on being honest, and so people are they're not dishonest in terms of lying, but they tell as little of the truth as they can in terms of some of the messy stuff. The future of our healthcare system, the real financial state of the country, the state of our pension programs. I mean, you could go on.